I'm 26 years old, still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm not too sure about, so to say I've been stressed would be a monumental understatement. My mom and I were not getting along one week, and everyone was just bothering me, so I wanted to escape for a weekend. I looked into little one-bedroom Airbnbs up in the mountains and found one for cheap. It was in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple of hours away from us, and based on the pictures, it was this nice, private, and peaceful-looking little place surrounded by woods, and it was the fall too, so the foliage was going to be beautiful. I told my parents I was going there for the weekend, and as expected, my mom seemed overly happy about me leaving for the weekend, and my girlfriend was more so just confused, finding it weird and suspicious that I was going away to some random cabin in the woods, alone for a weekend. When Friday came, I packed a backpack full of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, and I headed out for the road. It was around a 2.5-hour drive, door to door. The area of Troutville was very quiet and scenic. It was a perfect escape from suburbia back home, and I surely needed a nice weekend just to spend to myself. I was driving up a gravel road when my GPS told me I arrived. I saw an opening in the trees next to the road, and I remember the instructions the owner of the Airbnb gave me were to cut through this opening onto the grass and up the little hill. I did exactly this, and there I saw the cute little house sitting at the top of the hill. The second I stepped out of the car, I inhaled the fresh rural air, instantly feeling happy I did this. The owner told me where to find the key to the front door. I let myself in and checked the place out. It was a nice cozy living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and one loft bedroom that you had to climb a ladder-like stairway to get up into. There was a circular window over the bed, so lots of light got into the house, which was nice. I went out to walk some of the trails the owner told me about a 5-minute drive away. On the drive back to the house afterwards, I noticed these two guys walking down the gravel road. As my car was passing, they literally stopped in their tracks to turn and look at me as I passed. I waved and smiled, thinking they were friendly locals, but they didn't wave back. It was completely off-putting. They looked at me as if my driving down the road was a crime. I didn't look back. I turned into the entrance of the property and back up the hill. I started reading one of the books I brought with me in the living room with the fireplace going. It was incredibly cozy. The sun was on its way down, and after reading a chapter of my book, I realized I was getting hungry, so I went outside to my car, about to drive to the nearest Walmart, when I noticed two men kind of running into the woods down the hill by the entrance of the property, probably in response to seeing me come outside. I wondered if it was those two guys from the road earlier. It was incredibly strange. I suddenly decided to take my laptop and backpack with me in the car while I was gone, just to be safe. On the drive into town, I messaged the owner letting him know about this. He replied, saying it's nothing to be alarmed about. There's a lot of teens in the area that walk around, so I dismissed it. I drove like 20 minutes to the closest Walmart since there were literally no grocery stores in the area. I picked up a few food items to hold me over. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was completely pitch black out. There were no street lights on these gravelly roads, and with no neighboring houses, truly the only light was from my headlights. It was creepy for sure. I pulled up to the hill to the little house. It was almost hard to find in the dark. I grabbed my backpack in the grocery bag and went up to the house in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to see. Once inside, I locked the door immediately. It was creepy out there. I ate real quick and went back to reading my book by the fire, and pretty soon, the lights to the room suddenly cut out, and the only light in the entire house was from the fireplace. I tried flicking on anything electric, but the power was gone. I went to message the owner again, who swiftly replied back to check the main breaker in the circuit box outside by the telephone pole near the back of the house. I didn't reply. There was no way in hell I was going out there. I was already paranoid from earlier, and why would the power be randomly cut out anyway? Something was off. I heard a creak in the floorboard from the darkest corner of the room by the bathroom door. I looked over, saw this tall looming figure in the doorway of the bathroom, lit up only by the fireplace. My worst fear had been realized. This was actually happening. A soft yet deep and disturbing voice told me to remain calm and give him everything I had. I was so scared I could barely speak. I said all I had was my laptop and some clothes. He told me to empty my wallet of all my money, which I did as he stood in the doorway. I still couldn't see his face. He told me to go into the kitchen and stay there. Moments later, I heard the door to the house close. I looked into the living room. My laptop, backpack, and money were all gone. I called 911 quietly to report a robbery. 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. I described the two guys I'd seen walking down the street earlier that day, assuming it was them working together on this. Basically, all the officer could tell me was that they'd be on the lookout for anyone matching those descriptions. I messaged the owner to tell him what happened, and he was sympathetic at first, or so it seemed. He said I could go home the next day, but he didn't want to refund me for my horrible experience. A trip I thought would be a nice detox for a stressful point in my life only made it worse, and there's a small part of me that believes the Airbnb host may have something to do with it because I still have no idea how that guy got into the house. During a road trip I was on this year, I stayed at 2 Airbnbs. Both were just overnight stops for me to sleep at, not so much to actually enjoy. I drove for 10 hours from my house to the first Airbnb, which was out in a small town in the middle of nowhere. When I arrived, I wasn't expecting it to have been as small of a town as it was, though in total, there were no more than 30 or 40 homes, with a single grocery store and a few other markets in the center. I pulled into the driveway of the Airbnb. It was listed as a single-bedroom home, and the pictures were pretty nice, except it never displayed the outside of the house, and I could see why. It was old and likely hadn't had any exterior work since it was built. All that mattered was the inside, but seeing that didn't keep my hopes up. I got out of my car and got my bag from the trunk, and as I walked up to the front door, I felt something strange. I stopped and listened, hearing total silence throughout the entire town. It was late, so it was probably normal to be quiet at this time, but I'd never been in a town this small before, and even at night in most places, there's some sort of noise, but here, there was not a single sound at all. I went up to the door and opened the lockbox, then put the key in, only to find the door was already unlocked. I slowly opened it and called out asking if someone was home. I didn't hear anyone, and the inside seemed to be empty with all the lights off, so I went in and made sure to lock the door behind me. The first thing I did was walk around the house to see if everything was okay. It was much nicer on the inside than it was on the outside, and the door being left unlocked I assumed was a simple mistake because there were no other signs of anything unusual. I went to bed just 15 minutes after arriving, needing to get up to drive in less than 8 hours. I fell asleep quickly but woke up a few hours into the night. I was tired and only half awake, unsure why I even woke up. I turned and checked my phone for the time, and that's when I heard something from outside the room. It was a dull thump like something hitting the wall. I jumped out of bed and looked at the door with wide open eyes. The sound was gone now, but I slowly opened the door and checked. The hallway was empty, nothing on the walls either to show for the thump I heard. I stepped further down, keeping the lights off, and looked around the corner into the living room. A man was sitting on the couch facing away from me, staring forward into the unlit room. My stomach dropped, and I froze up, watching him sit there without moving, like he wasn't worried about being in someone else's house. I carefully and quietly walked back to my room and locked myself inside, calling the police. Being so far out, I was sitting in the corner of the room in silence, waiting for an entire hour for the officers to arrive. During that hour, I never heard any sounds from outside the room, not even a footstep or a thump, but when the police came in and looked around, the man was gone. The only sign of him was the front door being unlocked. Once the officers left, I continued with my road trip, not wanting to spend any more time in that town. The host of the Airbnb gave me a refund and stayed in contact with the police about the incident, but I stopped receiving updates after a few days. I don't know if I'll ever get answers on what really happened that night. My boyfriend Sean and I went on a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. I booked us a stay in an Airbnb that was listed as an off-grid cabin. It had a few hundred reviews with a 5-star rating, so I didn't think it looked sketchy. The cabin was an old one-room cabin with a potbelly stove and a loft area. There was no electricity, and it was in a remote part of Vermont down an old dirt road. There was one house about half a mile away that was owned by the host, and she was away, so we were alone. We got there around 4 p.m. and had a really nice evening cooking dinner and playing board games by candlelight. We had hiked all day and were exhausted by 10, so I went up to the loft to sleep while my boyfriend decided to sit outside and smoke. About 20 minutes later, while I was in that space between deep sleep and consciousness, I was jolted awake by a large banging sound on the side of the cabin. Before I could yell down, Sean yelled up to me asking if that was me. Confused and feeling like I must be dreaming, I groggily yelled,
"No! Was that you?"
He said no, but didn't seem too worried since he was sitting outside and didn't see anyone. We go camping frequently, so it takes a lot for us to get freaked out by random noises in the night. We figured it was probably a tree branch that broke off and fell against the cabin. I started to fall asleep again when there was another loud bang, like a thwacking sound from another part of the cabin. At this, I jumped out of bed and climbed down from the loft. I met Sean as he was coming through the door. He told me to grab all the sharp things that I could find and go back into the loft. He was putting on a calm demeanor, but I could tell he was a little freaked out. I asked him what he thought it was, and he cautiously said that he didn't know. He said he didn't see anything when he was outside, but he thought he might have heard footsteps. As we were whispering, we heard a small, slow scraping noise that trailed for about 3 feet against the wall of the cabin, then silence again. I was pretty scared at this point and didn't know what to do. Our car was parked about 100 feet away from the cabin, so we would have to face whatever was out there in the dark in order to get to it, which is probably what they wanted. I was also afraid that if this was a human, they might have done something like slash the tires or block our ability to get back down the driveway. Sean told me to stay very quiet and go back up to the loft while he sat downstairs and waited. He had a hunting knife and a large stick, and I had a few steak knives, but otherwise, we were sitting ducks. The downstairs of the cabin had huge windows on 3 walls, half of which were just screens, so if someone was outside, they could easily be watching us or could slash through the screen to get inside. I wanted to stay downstairs, but Sean ordered me to go upstairs, saying that it would be easier to fight this guy without me there if it came to that. I went up and sat in the middle of the bed, clutching an array of knives in my fists. I don't think I ever listened so intently before. Sean yelled out,
"Hello!"
to see if he could get any response or perhaps scare away if it was an animal. We heard nothing for what felt like 20 minutes, then the scraping sound came back, much louder, like someone was dragging a rake or a hoe across the side of the cabin. I heard clear, methodical footsteps, trailing off around the side of the cabin. Sean then came up to the loft and pulled the ladder up. He said he didn't like how they could see him, but he couldn't see them, and if they came into the cabin, he could at least get the jump on them from up here. We sat on the bed in silence. I was looking at him in terror. It was probably around midnight at this point, and I realized that we were going to be stuck in that cabin until morning. The noises continued and intensified. There was more banging that seemed to be coming from all different sides of the cabin. Intermittently, the scraping returned. This could not have been an animal. The sounds were too methodical. We didn't hear any grunting like there was a bear or bobcat, and there were constant footsteps. There was a clear crunch of one foot going in front of the other all around the sides of the cabin. There would be pauses of 10 to 20-minute intervals, then it would all start up again. At one point, there was a strange rattling sound on the outside, like someone was trying to shake or climb the pipe on the outside of the cabin that fed into the potbelly stove. This carried on for hours. Sean and I just laid in that bed, paralyzed in silent fear, staring into each other's terrified faces. I kept waiting to hear the front door burst open or the screen window rip. I was convinced that we were both about to be murdered, and every gruesome possibility kept playing in my head. I have never been that terrified, but no one ever came into the cabin. We never heard any voices, whispers, deranged giggling, or anything, just the loud scraping, banging, rattling, and footsteps. Finally, around 5 in the morning, we started to hear roosters in the distance, and the loft was slowly lit by early dawn light. The sounds finally stopped. Sean looked around the cabin, trying to find scraping marks or clear footprints, but there was nothing. My car was thankfully fine, and we packed everything up as quickly as possible to get the heck out of there. I messaged the Airbnb host to tell her about our experience, and she said it must have been a porcupine. If you could find a porcupine that makes loud banging noises and can walk like a human, let me know.